Welcome to my intro tutorial for the Match-3 blueprint. Just so you know, I've just spent 20 minutes talking and I've only realized that I was not recording. So here's take 2. Okay, so in this tutorial I'm going to try to go through the thought process of the system. Now one thing I realized that it's going to be impossible for me to go over every single detail specifically because this would take hours. Okay, if we just go inside of the M3 main game, which is the main actor of our level, you're going to see that there's a lot of stuff happening basically everywhere, a lot of crazy stuff, and there's a bunch of custom macros, a bunch of custom functions, and I just can't go over that specifically and all its variables in a feasible amount of time. And in any case, it wouldn't even be useful to you. The reason for that is because you have to look at all these functions and these macros and even these sections. These sections are basically macros that are expanded, if you will. You have to look at them as you would, for example, the for loop macros. And what I mean by this is that if you go inside of the macros and you change something, you delete something, add a new node, or change a whatever, it's not going to be a for loop anymore. It's going to be something else, right? So you're basically going to have destroyed this for loop. So the best way to do what you would be trying to do is to create a brand new macros instead of altering the for loop. So this is basically how you should look at all of these things and all that. It's like the for loop. You don't want to go inside and change it. You don't even really need to understand how the inner workings happen. What you need to know is that this is a for loop and it does this, right? That's the thing, same thing for all of that. So for example here, the game is setting the device. Is it Windows? Is it HTML? Is it iOS, Android? Basically just to know, am I going to use a mouse or a touch device? It's setting the camera, setting the widget. So all these things, it's good to know that it's happening, but you don't really need to know how it's happening. It's important to know that it's happening because let's say you have a brand new widget or a new 3D widget. Well, this would probably be a good place to implement this new widget. You would just go and add create new widget, blah blah blah, and set it here. Now with that said, there's some specific features that I would like to talk about, but instead of talking about them in this video, I'm gonna make some specific videos about this, about those certain features. What is important to know is that, oh, I'm spawning the game pieces here. This is what's happening over here. Now the places before that are pretty self-explanatory. This one again, you know, don't really need to know what all that stuff is doing, just that it's finding the extremity rows times 2. So now after that it spawns the game pieces. Now this is a good place to know, and there is one macro that I will talk about, and that is the game slot initial setup. This is basically where the M3 main game is passing information to the game slot piece, to the game slot actor, I mean. So if you were to create new variables or new information from the main game actor, and you wanted to pass this to your spawned game slot actor, this would be the place to do it. So you would probably add it somewhere in there using the game slot reference and maybe its index. Now one thing I do want to talk about inside of the M3 main game is the shuffle mechanic. Okay, the reason I want to talk about this is because this is a stochastic system, so that means that the game is going to shuffle. If it finds a match in the new board, it's going to shuffle again. If it finds a match, it's going to shuffle again, and it's going to do this as many times until it finds a board that has no matches. So in theory this could happen a million times over and over again. In practice it never happened. Just like you could say that if you flip a coin, you could potentially get heads a million times in a row. But that's never going to happen in practice. And the reason I'm telling you this is because if you take, well, first we're going to put an input E, so that we can test our shuffle mechanic, or look at it in action. And if you were to do this, like, oh, I want to play around with the shuffle mechanic, you do like I just did, and then in this case, with the default level, you press E. And like, well, hey, what's going on? Nothing's happening. In fact, something is happening. The game is currently processing the shuffle mechanic, and now it just happened. If I do it again, it may take a little bit more time, or maybe a little bit less time. And you're going to be like, well, this is not working at all. It's taking forever. So yeah, in this case, it's very, first of all, in a typical scenario where the player is playing, he would never end up with a shuffle, because there's so many possible matches that every time a new game piece is generated, there's always going to be a match present on the board for the player to do. So the game is never going to actually shuffle. Not only that, but while I'm pressing E currently, I've got all these manually placed game pieces of the same type, which means there's that much more chances of a match happening on the board. Now, if we look at the board currently, there's a lot of these hand matches. So if I press E, it's probably going to take a long time, because there's so many possible matches. Now, like I said, this is not a typical scenario gameplay-wise. Inside of an actual game, the player is never going to get a shuffle in this case. Now, the only time that this may not be true is if you were to create a button for the player to manually shuffle. If you were to do this, keep in mind that you don't want to have these huge levels or have a lot of manually placed game types, because it just creates a lot of potential match chance, right? And if the player, for some weird reason, decided to press shuffle right at the beginning of the level, there's a chance that it may take a few seconds if you have a huge grid like this with a lot of manually placed game pieces. So I'm telling you guys this information so that you know, okay, well, this is taking a long time because of that. If we were to go in a typical level, and when I say typical, I'm talking about you know, the standard sized grid that you may find in Candy Crush and, you know, Farm Saga and whatever game out there. Usually it's a 7x7 grid or 6x7 or by 8. I don't think I've seen bigger than 9x9, and I would recommend not going higher than 9x9, although as exemplified in the default level, 11x11 could potentially work. I haven't tested too much bigger than that. I know that if you go 20x20 and up, the game is going to start to choke up. Anyway, so in this example, 7x7, if I press E, it's going to happen instantaneously, because there's not as many chances of finding a match than there were in the previous level. I can even spam the E, and you're going to see that the game is going to be able to do this very quickly. Sometimes a little bit slower than other times, but generally speaking, it's going to happen very, very quickly. And after that, if we find a match, it's going to keep working as intended, right? So just bear in mind, if you're trying to shuffle the game in these crazy scenarios, that you may run into some hiccups. Now back to our default, we don't need to save this. We're going to delete this. Okay, so now we've kind of looked at the initial event begin play sequence of the H3 or the M3 main game. Everything else that happens below, including the shuffle mechanic, is stuff that happens during runtime or during gameplay. Well, I mean, this happens during gameplay also, but it's on the event begin play. Anyway, so again, this stuff, it's good to know that, okay, here the game slot is sending the new indexes and new position to the M3 main game. So let's say you move a game slot or a game piece and you find a match, it's going to send that information to this actor so that this actor knows when it's going to look for a new match. Okay, well, now I know the new indexes. I know each of the game pieces' new type, so now I can look for a match. Um, and then after that, let's say, well, after that the game piece was moved, it found a match and everything fell down. It's gonna look, okay, everything moved down, it's finished moving. Did I find a match? If so, then repeat the process. Otherwise, okay, the move is done, now the player can play again. Another noteworthy place is the endgame action. This is where you would have endgame sounds, endgame animation, endgame menus, and so on and so forth. So probably after the or before the open level. So somewhere in here you would add all your cool stuff. Um, the exit. This is a little bit temporary, mostly for testing purposes, because in a gameplay context you probably don't want your player to be able to hit escape and the game closes instantaneously. If you press escape, you would probably open up a menu where you would be able to exit. But anyway, so this is there for now, not too hard to find. The score, this is just for the tracking of the score purposes. And yeah, so that's basically it for the M3 main game. Now we're going to look at the game slot. And the same thing for the game slot. Everything that is going on in these sections that are super big, super complicated, and it's probably going to make your mind explode if you look at it too long. Look at it as you would the for loop. It works as intended, and it's not really meant to be trifled with. Same for all the functions and all the variables. If you look at some of this stuff, it's like, whoa, spaghetti. But it works as intended, and it's not really meant to be changed. With that said, so again, we're going to kind of try to understand the process of the function of this entire actor. So basically everything begins here, set game piece. This is when the game piece gets spawned. So all initial, well, there's two parts to it. The initial setup, as we saw earlier, a lot of the initial setup gets sent over by the M3 main game actor. But you could also create some initial setup over here. In this case, the numbers get set here. There's some material getting set up, base score multiplier. Aside from that, there's two important events that get called, the set location and the set neighbor. These two events are events that happen multiple times during the gameplay as the game progresses. So set slot location over here basically sets the location of the game piece. Very straightforward. This is going to be based on the collision component, which is the most reliant component inside of the main game. The do not edit one, slot box do not edit. So this is really the area that holds the integrity of the grid position and whatnot. So yeah, this one is really important. Okay, so beyond that, it's going to find neighbors, and in the first instance is going to reset all the values pertaining to this, because the game starts, it sets the neighbors, and then you move, it has to find its new neighbors, so it's going to erase all the information that it previously had, and then repopulate these variables with new information. And then from there, it's going to find the match for the game slots. Another big section. A lot of copy paste, though. It's if the game pieces, well, no, it's not about moving. It's gonna check on my left, if the player were to move left, do I have any matches there? So let's say it's gonna say, if I move left, do I have any matches to my left? Do I have any matches to my right? Do I have any matches to my top, to my bottom, in between, and so on and so forth for all the other possible moves. So each game slot knows before the player if it can move left or right or down or up. Also, after that, it's going to check for special matches. In my case, I created if it has a 4 in a row or if it has a double match. A double match is basically you have 3 twice. So let's say you have a cross, let's say you have an L shape. I think that's it. Yeah, so this is where that's happening. This is another kind of important place. If you want to create specific match types, you would do this over here. Again, this is something that I'm probably going to make a specific tutorial for as I create my own special conditions. Used for debug, we're going to talk about this after. Okay, so basically these are all the things that we just talked about, or things that happen without the player's involvement. Now if we start looking at swap, this is from the player's involvement. This is when the player starts clicking on the game pieces and moving them around. This is where that begins. So this is the player clicking, and it's going to check if it can click or it can touch. And it's going to move. Now if I move up, left, down, right, what happens is going to send, it's going to check is it valid or not. So it's going to check on all 4 of them again. So if it is valid, then you're going to go off to do certain things. If it's not valid, then you're going to return to no match. And all the movements are based from move component to very simple stuff. Aside from that, after that, there's a bunch of complicated stuff that happens. But what you need to know is from there, the game slot that you just moved is going to send information to all the other game slots in the game. It's going to send information to the game slots that are parts of the match. It's going to send game slot information to the ones that need to move down. It's going to give the information to the other game pieces that are not moving down to give them the updated index, the new position, the new type of the new game pieces, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole lot of stuff happening from here on. So rows and times to move down happens from there. This basically ends up shooting into this guy, which is for the matches found. So this is going to move the matches up outside of the grid, and then it's going to make them fall back down. This is going to it's going to count how many times the game pieces have to move down who had matches destroyed underneath them. And then inevitably all of these matches and game pieces that need to move down are going to end up here, and they're going to move down. Now during this whole process, also there's information being passed from the game piece actor, or from the game slot actor to the M3 main actor, such as again updating the index, updating the location, and all that fun stuff. So this is all stuff that, you know, okay, this is happening, but especially move matchup and over here, unless you want to have specific animations to the movement of your game pieces, you're probably not going to touch too much of these guys a whole lot. Same for the game piece that must go down, new matches, you don't really need to touch that, the shuffle. The important places for us, if we want to create new things, as we saw during the tracking system, game piece gets destroyed. This is an important event. This is when the game piece gets destroyed. So you could have specific sounds here, particle effects, and stuff like that. Now if you wanted to have specific particle effects for, let's say you have a match 4 that happens, you would probably do this over here. But again, this is something that I'm probably going to make a specific tutorial about. But this is basically where the game piece is sending all the matches through this event. Now, with that said, reset disable movement. This could possibly be useful to know. This is where the game dictates whether the player is able to click or to not click on the game pieces. Score multiplier, most of that is adjusted through the exposed variable, so you don't really need to play around with that. They're pretty versatile, and I can't imagine needing more than that. But again, if there's anything that you want to change or you need more information, just feel free to ask me, and I'll be more than happy to answer. Okay, now with that said, the debug. Okay, this is a really important place or useful place to know about, because this is where we're going to be able to find out very specific information about our game piece when we click on it. So let's say we're in the game and we want to know if a specific variable is working or is being assigned to our game piece. This is where you would look. For an example, let's say I wanted to make sure that the indexing was working properly and the unique type. I wanted to know the type of my game pieces. In this case, I need to print. So I'm going to look for the index first, and we're going to look for the unique type after. And the unique type is pretty useful one. It's basically the game slot or the game pieces type. Okay, so now with this plugged this way, every time I click on a game piece actor, it's going to tell me its index and its unique type. So this should be 0 as an index, and I think it's type 5. So there you go, 0 and 5. The index get printed first, so it's at the bottom, and then the type at the top. So let's say we look in here, index 62, index 63, index 64. So we see that the indexing works pretty well, and then all the types, all the eyes are type 5, all the gargoyles are type 4, all the hands are type 3, and so you get the idea, right? So any information that you want to know, to test, to see if it's working, this is where you would do it. Now another really useful place to do some debugging, because our game type is essentially, it's not a guessing game, but you have to find your moves and stuff. This could become really painful testing wise. I know this firsthand. When you're spending hours testing your game, it becomes really frustrating having to find matches just to test your game. So this place is a lifesaver from that perspective. So let's say in my case I was testing out my special matches, and I wanted to know, is there a match 4, for example. So the match 4 are this one in my case, and the double matches are here. So I wanted to know the match 4. I'm going to go over here and plug everything. Oops, that's not the one. Oh, actually, yes, it is the one. My bad. It's the completed that you want. So you plug the completed in here, in here, and basically this is going to highlight all the game pieces that I have before a match. Oh, over here. Yeah, even when it's highlighted, sometimes I have a hard time finding them. Anyway, so this is really useful for finding matches quickly and not having to find them yourself. But anyway, so a really cool way to find your matches, and you can still check if there's no double matches or match 4. So you would plug this instead, and well, we're just gonna look at one. We don't need to set them all. So basically what this means with this plugged is all the game pieces that can move left are gonna get highlighted. Well, the matches of 3. So this guy can move left, this guy can move left, this guy can move left, and so on and so forth. Okay. So really useful debugging tool here. And I think that this was basically the last bit that I wanted to cover. Yeah, this wraps it up. And probably for the 10th time in this video, send me questions if you have any issues, you want to understand something more specifically. I know that this blueprint system is huge, it's really complicated, and for brand new users it may seem scary, but I assure you it's not scary at all, because everything that is in place works as it should, and all that you have to do is build on top of it. The core functioning works, it works really well, and the little bits and pieces that you want to add, like I've shown in my checker tutorial, in my tracking system tutorial, it's really not complicated to add new stuff to this. Alright, so anyway, so I'm going to keep creating these tutorials. Feel free to request specific tutorials, and I hope you really enjoyed this project. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.